I spoke in the last video that it's very common for us to think of astrology and life external of ourselves in general as causative for our inner reality. And the more that we understand that all of life is reflecting one reality, which is inside and is outside, then anything we look at, we begin to see it from a completely different frame, different reference point. So when we start to look at astrology, it becomes more a study of consciousness, becomes more a study of what's happening inside of me. How is everything reflecting the reality of my own consciousness? And through the study of astrology, we become more and more, we approach a deeper wisdom and appreciation for the nature of life. The more we study ourselves, the more we understand our own consciousness, the more it unravels for us what's going on here, what this whole thing is about. And so what I want to speak about now is go into some more nuance and describe the three ways we can look at a chart. These are basically three different sequential levels of looking at the natal chart, and they're all sort of connected to the same understanding. So the first is, if I say that the natal chart is reflecting the inner reality of the soul, and if I say that everything that's manifesting in your life is a reflection of the inner reality, is simultaneous to it, if there's no separation, which again is no passing statement. It might sound like a simple thing to say, but I always seem to be finding that the ramifications of that, the real implications of this run profoundly deep. So if we hold that premise, then it must be that your natal chart has a greater context beyond just a superficial manifestation of a personality. So the first level of understanding is that your natal chart is a reflection of where you're coming from, what's been going on within consciousness that's led to this lifetime. A very simple way to understand this is, so long as we are operating within time and space, everything manifesting now within time and space has been conditioned to become what it is up until this point in time. Everything, in virtue of being a thing, exists within only time. Like, things exist within time and space. They don't exist outside of time and space. And anything that exists within time and space is developmental. And so the manifestation of this body, of this form, of this personality structure, all of it's temporary, but it exists within a context developmental process. And so we can look at the natal chart as simply saying, this is where you left off. This is the current conditioning of your consciousness. A good analogy for this would be if you're watching a television series. Whatever episode you're watching has context with the prior episodes. And there are some episodes that are a season finale. There are some episodes that are the first episode of a season. So you can actually look at a chart and say, okay, here are the cycles that are still unfolding, that are unraveling right now. Or you're starting a new cycle in these areas. Or this is culminating. There are ways to look at a chart and understand these processes that are unraveling, that are unfolding. So it's a way of appreciating that this lifetime, this experience, being in what we call you, has context. It doesn't come out of nowhere. Because again, consciousness is unformed, it's unconditioned, it can't be mapped within time and space. But everything that is manifest reflects how consciousness is manifesting itself and creating conditions for itself, thus within time and space. And once we begin looking at the reality of conditions, we're looking at history. we're looking at past, we're looking at a developmental process. So it says where you're coming from. And the way that I will phrase this is your natal chart reflects the underlying karmic reality of the soul. And when I say the karmic reality of the soul, it's how consciousness has become conditioned. Karma, in the way that I think of it, isn't primarily an external factor. Its primary truth is an internal condition, which then reflects in external conditions and repeats and cycles in external conditions. And we play out external conditions. But it's only because the external reality is simultaneous to the inner reality. So our natal chart reflects the internal nature of our consciousness, the karmic conditioning that has led to this moment in time. And only karmic conditioning leads to moments in time. That which is beyond conditioning does not lead to time. Okay. And the second level of understanding a chart is what follows. It is in this lifetime, in this current manifestation, what is playing out? What is manifesting? So here are the cycles you're playing out. We can say it is the intention, the evolutionary intention for this current experience, this episode. And by the way, whether or not we want to use incarnation as a concept, what's relevant in how I'm speaking of this is to simply recognize that from birth to death is an episode. How do we know this? Well, you're in this body. You've always been in this body since you were born, and you're going to be in this body until you die. And so there are very clear, objectively discernible markers that dictate the parameters of what we can call a lifetime, an episode. And you have the same natal chart. In this study of astrology, we recognize that the moment of your birth is your natal chart. And we can talk more about that stuff later on. But you have your same chart your whole life. And so this second level of understanding the chart says, this is what you're working with for this lifetime. These are the karmic dynamics that are unfolding. And thus, it describes the conditions, the external dynamics in your life that are manifesting, that are being played out. But it's all reflecting back on the unraveling of our internal self-awareness. It's also going to describe, and again, this is one of those things that we often underappreciate and don't fully understand. It will describe certain parameters and limitations for this lifetime, just as your body is a limitation. It's only a limitation from the point of view of, here's a context. When you're watching an episode of Seinfeld, you're not watching an episode of Friends. That's a parameter. So your karmic reality, your unique soul conditioning, which reflects back to your own individuality. Like everyone's karmic reality and their conditioning and what they're unraveling ultimately reflects back to your unique nature. Like no one person's karmic journey and unraveling is the same as another, because each soul is an individual. And so it speaks to what is specific and relevant to your own soul journey, the parameters. So that part of this evolutionary path we find is simply accommodating to, respecting and becoming present to, cultivating a quality of wisdom and insight into, in a way, what we're dealt. We can think of it as what we're dealt, but another way of thinking of it as how life is showing us ourself. That's a little more self-responsible, thinking of it in that way. It's a little bit more, I'm claiming responsibility for this, even if I don't understand how this is all connected to a singular root of my own self-realization. And we also find that every single lifetime, it's kind of like playing a video game. You're playing the video game, and from the point of view of the character in the video game, you may not realize that there are certain levels and, characters and obstacles set up in the video game. From the point of view of the programmer, the whole video game is set up. So there are aspects to our life journey where our individual ego consciousness, that's, for many of us, for most of us, it thinks, I am this is what I am, this is it. We're predominantly unaware of sort of the template and the terrain of this incarnation and things that are intended, things that are sort of planted for this life. And as we grow and kind of move more into our evolutionary journey, there's a sort of humbling that happens where we become more aware and appreciative of, okay, this is what I'm working with, and we can't just transcend it. We can't just escape it and move beyond it. There's great wisdom and truth in meeting the realities that we've created for ourselves, in meeting the ways that consciousness has conditioned itself to think and believe and hold itself in a certain way. We come into entire episodes or mini episodes or scenes that we need to experience it and play it out and learn from it so we can integrate it and then move on. The third level of reading the chart is a little bit more off the charts. But I have to speak of it, because if I just speak about the first two, then it'll seem like, okay, this is what we're working with right now. And we're just a lemming kind of walking this path that we have no choice over, no consciousness around. This third level corresponds to this mysterious wild card of consciousness being aware of itself. That's off the charts. And we can't change our karma. We can't move into a different body. But self-awareness, consciousness, which is also love, where we bring love, unconditional love and acceptance into our lives, into all of our experiences, where we choose to yield to life from the stance of, whatever this is, I'm choosing to orient myself to what I deeply know inside cannot come and cannot go. I'm choosing to orient my security in the unchanging, in the midst of playing out this journey. That's a powerful stance. And the chart cannot say, it just doesn't say whether or not any of us are going to do that, because this is not a choice of the ego, it's the choice of the soul. We have to remember the ego is a satellite. It doesn't exist on its own. There's no substance to it. Our self-image, our self-concept is just that. What we are is soul. What we are is consciousness, projecting itself in a particular way, and that's what the ego is. So when we're making choices, choices from ego are predictable because they're just operating from an image, from a concept. And as long as we're relating to our life and triggered by the same things, our reactions and responses will be pretty predictable. But when we step away from this and we stand in our sovereignty as an expression of divine creative intelligence that's completely unique, completely individualistic, we are standing in this place of power where we are looking at the life that we are manifesting. We are looking at this vehicle of Ari, what he's experiencing, what he's working with. And it's all done as a way to become aware of as a soul, my internal reality. How I as a soul have become conditioned to hold on and grab and believe and possess certain ideas, certain identity structures. And with that awareness, with that sovereign stance, I have a greater ability to make conscious choices. Now, these conscious choices will not be, I'm going to choose to have blonde hair now. I mean, I can dye it, right? But I'm not going to be able to change my genetics like that. Although I can change my genetics, but how do we do that? Through a subtly penetrating process of actually getting into it from the inside out. No metamorphosis, structural DNA level changes can ever happen unless you get to the core, unless you get to the essence of the existing reality, get to the root. It's like meeting the shadow, meeting what is unconscious, seeing it, taking full responsibility for it. Then we can begin to grow and make changes on a new level. But still, it's important to understand the changes that a soul makes are only and always going to be in absolute relevance and resonance with who they are as an individual expression of divine creative intelligence. We are only going to be what we are. And our freedom is in being what we are. Not saying, well, I'm going to be something else and I'm going to pretend to be some other individuated form. Again, consciousness is unformed. But each expression of consciousness, as is coming in and out of these journeys of self-remembering, is completely individualistic. The soul is completely individualistic. So when we cultivate and claim our sovereign awareness, which is a non-victim state, it's not necessarily comfortable, but it's a very empowered place to be. Interestingly, what happens is we poise ourselves to line up with our evolutionary directive. A very accessible metaphor for this would be like the caterpillar having an awakening and realizing its nature as consciousness. And in that sense, it is enabled to let go of its form and move into the next stage. Right? Maybe there's a caterpillar that will skip the butterfly entirely and just return to the source. Who knows? Usually what I find is there's an evolutionary process that we need to play out. And if we try to skip steps, it actually leaves unintegrated psychological content. And then we got to go back and just do it. But this caterpillar realizes, oh, I'm holding on to this form, to this way of being, this way of thinking. I'm identifying with this way of life. I see that it's not serving me. And in that sentence, it is not serving me. It means I am other than the caterpillar. I am other than my conditions. Time to evolve and move on. And so we evolve. We're able to make the conscious choices. I am doing this. I am letting go of this. I am making this change. I am going for this. But what happens is in line with the evolutionary trajectory of our own soul individuality. It's kind of like if you're bowling, but you have bumpers on the side. You know, if you ever did that when you were a kid, or not when you were a kid, and you don't want the bowling ball to go into the gutters. So the foam that protects the bowling ball from going into the gutters is kind of like a good metaphor for this. It's you're staying in lane, and so your ball is going to go straight to the pins until consciousness gets hooked on another identity. Right? It's like, oh, but this, and that's fine because we'll do that, and we just got to let it happen. The whole self-awareness thing is this beautiful, mysterious dance. Like, try to become self-aware. It's such a head trip. You can't. You just become it because you choose it. How do you choose it? I don't know. Find out. It's one of those things. I think romance is the best and most apt metaphor for all of this, and I'll probably want to talk more about this in a future video. But how do you make yourself turned on? How do you open your heart to your beloved? At some point, you just choose to. You just choose to. It's a conscious choice to become self-aware of what you're harboring on the inside and to look at it and say, well, what do I want? What's my intention? And we reorient towards that. And so once we open our heart to our beloved, to use this as a metaphor, the path that opens up isn't in our hands. It's not in our control. So evolution isn't something we can control, but we can make the choice to orient towards it. then what happens is the unfolding of our own unique essence, like the seed of an oak tree becoming an oak tree, right? It just, and when our consciousness evolves more and more, we realize I am not this oak tree, I am not this everything, right? We realize that we are playing out this journey of infinite consciousness, having this unique path of realization, and it keeps on going and refining and refining and refining. But it's one of those things that I feel is often misunderstood, where I find that there are two camps of people when it comes to this idea of astrology and the chart. And it's like, am I limited by my chart? Can I evolve beyond my chart? And some people are like, we don't have to be limited by our chart. We can be anything we want to. And other people will, think of it as, this is my destiny. This is my fate. I can't get out of it. And I feel that neither perspective is entirely accurate, although both have elements of the truth in it. We don't evolve out of our chart, just like we don't evolve out of our body. It's what we're working with here. Yet we can transmute our consciousness. We can absolutely affect a profound metamorphosis on an internal level that'll change our relationship to these dynamics and the octave and the level of consciousness with which it is expressing. The archetypes are there, but depending on what we're working out within our consciousness, these archetypes can be unraveling karmic dynamics that are sticky, or it can be expressing more and more in a pure, refined, and clear way. So, and can we evolve beyond our chart? Right? Can we just transcend it? No. You don't transcend anything. Unless you die. You can transcend the body. You can transcend form. But your consciousness, your choice, is interacting with a template, the karmic template, the parameters that are sort of the skeleton of this lifetime. I've never met an awakened person whose chart wasn't also active. Being awake doesn't mean you don't have a form. Being awake doesn't mean you're not playing out an individuality, because each form of consciousness, each soul has its own individuality. It can be self-realized or self-realizing and still have an individuality. In fact, anything being self-realized implies individuality. If it completely merges with source and there's no longer any individuality, there's also no self-realization. Self-realization implies some object, like there's something that's realizing itself. So as long as there's an evolutionary journey, there's going to be an expression of individuality, and that individuality doesn't go away. It just becomes more refined and more essential, more true to itself. Like anything in creation being authentically what it is. All right. Hopefully this video was helpful and offers some insight and perspective for just how to approach a chart, how to think of it. And when we start looking at the chart as symbolizing the unfolding of internalized karmic dynamics, what is unraveling within our consciousness? What's the evolutionary intention? What's the unique path of growth? It really becomes a profound and healing tool to become self-aware. And studying astrology, understanding the cycles that are playing out, the template, the parameters that are a part of this lifetime, it becomes a profound starting point to really understand this small moment on this journey, this one little episode that hopefully we can make the best use of.